For our episode on urbanization challenges and urban governance in the Philippines, we talked to Ika Fernandez, spatial planner, development worker, and a PhD candidate from the University of Cambridge. Here is our full interview.
All right. Okay. So hello everyone. Welcome to this episode of Hindi na Bago Yan, the season 4 of podcast conversations on Philippine history, politics and society. So for today's episode, we will be discussing a very important topic, a very important issue topic that touches the lives of everyone in the Philippines, whether you are living in a highly urbanized city or in the rural provinces of the country. We are going to talk about the issue of in general urban governance and the related topics of transport, mobility, housing, and all of those things. So we have with us today a development professional. Idol ko to sa pagiging professional development. Professional development professional. At siya ay isang urban planner at ngayon ay nagpi-PhD ng land economy sa University of Cambridge. So welcome Ika Fernandez.
Salamat, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
All right. So maybe to start off, maybe I didn't do enough justice dun sa introduction. Maybe I'll start off by asking you to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sige, hello po sa lahat. Ako si Ika Fernandez, isang urban planner and land specialist, development worker and researcher. Madalas pong pakalat-kalat sa iba't ibang syudad at lugar sa Mindanao. Pero po ako ay kasalukuyang nag-PhD sa University of Cambridge, looking at the link between forces placement and urbanization. So, ayun, apart from these things, I'm a practitioner and I also am part of various civil society networks, including Urbanismo, a group of barkada urban and transport specialists who are we're trying to look at in difficult questions around Philippine cities. So yeah.
All right. So we are very fortunate that Ika agreed for this interview kasi as you've heard, we will have insights from both an academic perspective, but very much more on the practical perspective since Ika has been very much involved in policy work and has done extensive field work in various areas in the Philippines. So maybe yung first question ko sa'yo, Ika, is more of these general picture type of question. So in the current context of the Philippines, no, so how would you describe, maybe in broad strokes, no, yung how would you characterize yung urban governance in the Philippines and all the related masalimuot na issues of transport, housing, and urbanization? Yeah.
Sige, maybe to start, I want to highlight how important the question of urban governance is to the Philippines. No, pag sinabing urban governance, it's the way we're able to make decisions about how people live, work, and play, diba, in spaces, no, particularly urban ones. And yung sa ngayon, no, kalahati ng mga lahat ng Pilipino ay nakatira sa mga syudad. Pero pagdating ng siguro 2050, aabutin ng mga 84%. So, as they say, the Philippines is rapidly urbanizing, no? And yung trajectory is usually most people in the rural areas to Metro Manila and other cities for the proverbial better life, no? So talagang ang reality is we have to think about how we can improve yung estado ng ating mga syudad for everyone. Bilang it is, these cities are yung engines of, diba, growth, innovation, and prosperity for all. And if you want to do a more inclusive and, diba, Philippines, lalo na ngayon na pagkatapos ng eleksyon, bagong administration na, diba, we have to think about how we're able to plan, finance, design, and manage, diba, decisions for our country. So, ano bang status ng urban governance sa Pilipinas? Sad to say, no, medyo marami tayong kailangang habulin sa larangan na ito, no, kasi for one, most Filipino decision makers are not used to thinking in terms of space and place, no. a lot of our programming is sectoral, I would think, no? Pero iba kasi yung usapin ng mga syudad. So if I had to use one word to describe our current state of the sector, it's one is it's highly fragmented, no? And even yung term na ginagamit natin for today, yung urban governance, that's not an automatic assumption for many of our government decision makers, no? Hindi natin naiisip kung paano ba lumalapat sa lupa yung mga pangailangan at yung mga pangarap ng ating mga kasamang Pilipino, no? So, in terms of how that translates, no, you mentioned transport. Sad to say, many people I've spoken to, even yung mga urban specialists, don't think of transport as an intrinsic part of urban governance. And it's crazy, no, kasi in fact, diba, it's the very lifeblood of our cities. So I think the latest number that most transport specialists use is a 2015 study from JICA, no, which found that only 12% of all Filipinos are car owners, no, which means that 88% of the population don't use cars, di ba? We commute, di ba, using mga bus, di ba, mga jeep, di ba? We walk, and then increasingly, especially after the pandemic, people are now cycling. However, a lot of our policies are still driven by cars. It's decided by people who use cars, who own cars, and therefore don't face the same challenges that yung regular commuters face every day. And so, for those who have been here in Manila, no, for the last few weeks, especially during the lockdowns, and then ngayon po, since they lifted yung work from home, grabe yung parusa sa mga tao, no? Lalo na, so basic lang, di ba, na yung available supply of public transport is not meeting demand. So that's only one aspect of it, no? You also mentioned yung lack of affordable housing, no? Ang laki-laki ng ating unmet need for yung safe and adequate shelters for everyone, whether urban or rural conditions. Ito nga actually medyo malaking debate ito kasi even in ating government, merong different figures on how to estimate housing demand. And so yung huling nakita ko is anywhere from 5 to 6 million yung unmet housing need, no? Kaya, for example, if you're in Manila, in Davao, or in Cebu, or any other yung mga major urban spaces, napakamahal ngayon ng renta, tsaka forget about owning a house. So, and most Filipinos, if you ask them, di ba, ang pangarap makapundal, magkaroon ng bahay, di ba, na may tahanan. Pero even that is so difficult to reach for most people for various reasons. It also has to do with yung the way we're able to manage and use land, yung tinatawag na land use, di ba, na regulation. So, dahil mahal ang lupa, di ba, mahal ang bahay, mahal lahat. No? And it's also tied to yung as a function of transport. No? So, all of these basic things have knock-on effects on everything from food security. No? Ngayon, ang pinaka-maigting na challenge sa hindi lang sa Pilipinas, kundi sa buong humanity is climate change, right? And so, although the Philippines has been investing din naman sa disaster risk reduction and partially yung climate change adaptation, no, reality is our cities will be hitting, will be at the forefront of the climate change crisis, no, and being able to address that is going to be a serious challenge, not only in terms of cutting down on emissions, but also making sure that our cities are able to adjust, no. Ay ang problema, a lot of our urban development initiatives are still geared towards infrastructure. Yung joke nga namin ng mga ibang kaibigan, no, kung 'di ba sa gera may utak pulbura, meron din yung utak semento, 'di ba? Meaning a certain mindset which thinks that these big concrete mega projects are the solution to all your problems, whether Diba? So for example, I know of several lawsuits, whether previous or ongoing, that have been trying to block, for example, these big flood control projects, diba? Which they say would help, for example, yung flooding problem, but in fact, inalabanan yung tubig, and therefore might be maladaptive. So, ayun, these are just a few of the basic concerns, no? Pero tali-tali sila lahat eh. And so, yung challenge of an urban governance frame, no, demands a certain creativity and expansion of thought na hopefully will, this next administration will be able to get to. Ayun.
All right. No, so before I go to my next question, I just would like to have a quick follow-up dun sa mga sinabi mo. Lalo na doon sa 88% of Filipinos are commuters, 'di ba? Kasi I really have this impression that much of our roads and maybe in general the infrastructure that we have in terms of transport ay talagang biased towards car owners. Would you agree with that
Yes,
observation? Can you elaborate on that?
absolutely. Absolutely, no. We were fed the dream that the mark of economic mobility is to have a car, no. However, it's ano ba, all conditions show that one, it's not affordable, no. Not if only 12% of the population can afford to have a car, and therefore, and also at the same time, the climate crisis, no, the trajectory should be weaning from fossil fuels and looking at more sustainable forms of transport, which can be, either in active mobility forms like biking, or yung mass transport, no. At the end of the day, if we have more mass transport options, that's going to get rid of the need to have yung single use cars na usually isa o dalawang tao lang yung may kinabang, no. And that also feeds to our eternal problem of traffic congestion dito sa Metro Manila, for example, no. People seem to think na na the solution for a more comfortable ride is to have a car, no, or the solution to address traffic is to widen roads. When in fact it's the opposite, no. The more you widen roads, the more congested it gets, especially if you're also not meeting yung mass transport demand. So, ayun. And you see this also in the current debate, for example, around Parex, if you've heard about this.
Yeah.
Yung Pasig River Expressway na ngayon very, very controversial.
Yeah, no, so I mean, having had the privilege of traveling and living abroad, no, yan din talaga yung isang striking realization for me that hit me quite directly siguro kasi dun mo marirealize na if you really have an efficient mass transport system, talagang hindi mo kakikitaan masyado ng traffic, no? So at yung mobility ng mga tao is, I don't know, mas swabe siguro tignan na talagang we can dream for the Philippines, no. Pero I'll dovetail with that, diba, doon sa sinabi mo kanina that urban governance is a very important issue, no, in general ng governance sa Philippines. So and you've mentioned a lot of this as well already, no. So what do you think is the most pressing problem that we have, no? So is it an issue of, kasi sometimes I get the impression na para siyang chicken and egg, no? Parang san ba magmumula yung solusyon or san ba nagmumula yung problem? So what are your thoughts on that?
It goes back to mindsets and models, no. Diba, sa development parlance, they call it yung theory of change, diba? So, meaning, ano ba yung naratibo, no? How do you now, as urban planners, no, as decision makers, how do you now understand what development is? Kasi if your model of development is a certain way, that affects the way that you plan, you design, you finance everything, no. Kasi if yung pangarap mo, for example, is concrete and steel, diba, that presupposes a certain level, certain mode of thought, no, diba? that may not necessarily be fit for purpose of the situation, or will align with the needs of the people involved. So sa akin, kailangan balikan yun di ba? Ano ba yung modes of urban development over urban governance at angkop sa pangailangan ng mga tao, that aligns with yung basic needs of the environment natin dito sa Pilipinas, di ba? And addresses yung fundamental na pangailangan ng mga nakararami, hindi lang ilan.
Right. So with that in mind, 'di ba, na it's a mindset, it's a paradigm situation, 'di ba? No, so in the last 6 years of the Duterte administration, we've seen one of the major, maybe arenas of contestation, but also a source of much pride of this administration is yung supposedly some would brand the quote unquote golden age of infrastructure through that build project. Diba? No? So maybe I'd like to ask you and get your insight na how has the government responded to these major challenges to the urban governance situation in the Philippines? And how would you maybe evaluate the responses that we've seen so far?
Sige, well, a lot of people are now weighing on build, obviously, pero let's go back to fundamentals. Number one, di ba, infrastructure is good. We need good, solid infrastructure to grow, di ba, to develop. We do need more bridges. We do need more good airports. We need good seaports. No question about it. Pero I think yung promise that was given 6 years ago, clearly by all metrics, including that of DPWH itself, clearly that promise has not been met. So if I remember my figures correctly, 6 years ago, yung original na target for build was mga 8.4 trillion yung target, di ba, na pero around April, I believe, may linabas na figures ang DPWH na out of the 119 infra flagship projects ng BBB, mga 12 lang yata yung natapos, and out of yung 8.4 na dapat nung simula nung Duterte administration, they brought it down to 5 billion, and even within that 5 billion, napakaliit, mga siguro out of 5 trillion rather, siguro mga 70.6 billion lang yata yung nagastos, so napakababa ng burn rate, and yung mga balak pa sana, for example noon na karamihan dun sa mga projects would be locally funded, di ba, na hindi ganun karaming utang, actually that didn't happen kasi around 3/4 of those projects ay puro mga foreign grants and loans. So basic issues. One, hindi na nga na-implement yung sabing i-implement, 'di ba? Kasi the whole plan was to do accelerated, 'di ba, implementation of projects and delivery. Parang sabi nila, it's tigil na yung plano, mag-deliver na tayo, pero even yung delivery hindi nangyari, meaning the red tape that's always been there in government has not been cut, And second, in this na more sustainable forms of financing, medyo marami tayong utang as a result of yung build. So and that doesn't also count the fact that not all of yung projects that have been implemented under build have been positively met by locals. So for example, two of the most controversial BBB bridges in Metro Manila would be the one dun sa bandang Manila, sa bandang Binondo, Chinatown, and then the other one sa may Racol, Estrella. And in terms of design, in terms of yung functionality, most engineers, di ba, will say na hindi siya parang there are certain design flaws, na hindi commensurate yung inutang sa anong binigay, and even in terms of yung heritage issues, di ba, in Binondo, medyo hindi siya okay, Bukod pa doon, meron din mga issues sa ibang BBB projects outside Luzon, if you remember the recent typhoon, which si Odette, which hit parts of northern Mindanao and in Visayas, I believe at least one big BBB project was found to be substandard. No, after hinigupit ni audit, no, lumabas ng inaudit ng mga structural engineers, lumabas na despite the cost of investment, no, hindi siya up to scratch, and therefore it's under investigation. So yun yung mga, I guess, yung the unmet promise of BBB. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so I always learn so much whenever I talk to someone like you na urban planner, and I realize how much it relates to other things like the politics and of course the economics of it all, no? So yung talagang question ng development ay talagang hindi siya clear cut na pwede nating pag-usapan in one sitting. Talagang mahabang proseso ng pag-aaral ang kailangan para magkaroon tayo ng siguro, I would say, a holistic approach towards these things, no? So pero as of now, siguro I'd like to ground the conversation a little bit to the people who are experiencing this on an everyday basis, no? So maybe with this, I'd like to also relate it to what you've been telling us a while ago na the climate crisis, and then of course the Philippines is always on the path of, you know, typhoons, and na nagbabago na talaga, na nagiging super typhoons na nagiging regular na. And then not only that, we also have, of course, man-made disasters like wars and all of these things, no? So conflict, internal conflict, no? So I know that you've done a lot of research in Mindanao, diba, where there are a lot of people that are affected by both of these things, no, by conflict and natural hazards such as typhoons and earthquakes, no. So in terms of understanding it from the perspective of those who experience it, diba, like the bakwit, no? So can you share some maybe stories or insights based on your exposure to the field and interactions with these people na magbibigay sa atin ng image kung gaano kaimportante yung pag-uusap natin tungkol sa urban governance?
Ayun. So, well, the Philippines is, I guess, one of the world's living laboratories when it comes to post-crisis reconstruction, but also the whole package of not just yung post-crisis, but also trying to manage and mitigate these effects long before. So, unfortunately, diba, we do get hit with an average around 20 typhoons per year, diba? And we do have armed conflict, diba, nationwide. So, yun yung mga bagay na unfortunately, despite all of our knowledge, diba, and experience, parang we still have a ways to go, no? So for example, Mindanao, no, where my field site is, some of the two biggest issues right now in terms of yung absolute number of IDPs, no, is Odette, no, yung typhoon that hit first quarter of this year. And then syempre yung Marawi, no? 2017 pa yung nangyari nung binomba ho yung built-up area sa Marawi City, no? After yung 5 months of fighting between the AFP and yung mga Black Flag groups. So on the face of it, parang they're two different things, pero the net effect is the same, protracted displacement, no? Yung sa Marawi, 5 taon na sila nagbakwit, no? They have not been able to return for the last 5 years. Yung sa Odette, it's been a couple of months now, pero hanggang ngayon, no, wala pa rin kuryente. Karamihan sa kanila, trapal pa rin yung mga bahay. And dahil nga nakatrapal ka, no, you're exposed to multiple vulnerabilities, including the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which is not finished yet, no? So, yun yung problema, and sad to say, part of also my research, no. A lot of yung ating mga planning systems don't take into consideration that yung experience of people who are displaced for a very long time, no. Usually, and this is something na intuitive for most development workers, usually yung mga bakwit ng Mindanao, for example, end up becoming yung informal settlers na mga syudad, no. But if you look at yung mga plano natin, no, they're next to invisible. So at the end of the day, well, it's hard to have like a short, sound bite for this. But at the end of the day, una, kung mga tao ay nagbakwit, we have to be able to do all we can to allow people to go home, number one. And second, to be able to put mitigation measures to ensure that should natural hazards or man-made disasters strike again, di ba, that yung itong effects na ito would be mitigated. So yun yung yung short answer. But there's a lot to be done.
Yeah, no, so from what I've been getting from you since a while ago, di ba, na parang, kasi yung next question ko is about what makes tackling these challenges so difficult. But I've been hearing from you since a while ago na it's a paradigm issue, it's a planning issue, di ba? So, pero if you look at it, di ba, parang madaming mga civil society organizations, INGOs, and there are several government agencies that are tasked to cover these issues, diba?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, what do you think makes it, a persisting challenge? For example, for Marawi, it has been 5 years since the bombings happened. So what makes it a very difficult issue to tackle? It's almost like a moving target even.
Ayun. So I mentioned earlier, di ba, na may multiple elements of urban governance, di ba? From the broader institutional and policy environment, di ba, to the planning side, to finance, design, and to implementation. So a lot of the bottlenecks happen across all of these things. So for Marawi, for example, you have a task force on Marawi, a big, massive interagency, di ba, na platform, di ba, na medyo fragmented, even if syempre, it's also very top down. It's national government implemented with limited roles for yung local actors. And take note, this is happening in the Bangsamoro, which is our first and only regional parliament, autonomous, no? So from that very perspective, medyo meron ka ng problema. And secondly, from the paradigm perspective, we have to remember na iba dapat, may differences talaga yung reconstruction paradigm if you're dealing with natural hazards, diba? Environmental hazards versus armed conflict, diba? But if you're applying yung physical frameworks ng DRR sa isang post-conflict context, may problema tayo doon. Sa planning side, for example, I'm not sure if most people know, pero in this, usually kasi for after events like this, dapat isang plano lang. Pero sa Marawi, dalawang plano ginawa. One for the battled area and one for the outside area. Financing is also an issue kasi, diba, sa laki ng problema, how do you ensure that yung adequate resources have to, are channeled into these areas, diba, short of, well, which follows a comprehensive plan. So kung sa plano pa lang may problema na tayo, paano pa yung financing, paano pa yung design, paano pa yung implementation? So, for example, right now, Duterte, in the last days of the Duterte administration, he signed the Marawi compensation bill. Pero may mga challenges doon kasi one, yung the framework of compensation still follows yung standard road right of way. So kung natamaan ka ng kalsada, di ba? Or you will get compensation based on yung existing laws. Pero that doesn't cover compensation for your trauma. It doesn't cover compensation for deaths. It doesn't cover compensation for looting, di ba? Things like that, no? So may ganong challenges as well. So not to mention, for example, the fact that sometimes planning laws can be weaponized against people. So not just in Marawi, if you go to other disasters, ang madalas mong maririnig ay no title, no return. Kung wala kang titulong malinis, hindi ka makabalik, di ba? Or if ikaw ay nasa tabi ng hazard area or tabi ng tubig, ikaw ay ma-resettle, di ba? With or without your consent. So it's a lot, no? So syempre, it's a whole new kettle of fish. Pero this kind of fragmentation I'm describing is also present not only, di ba, in Mindanao, but for example, also in NCR. So balik tayo sa Metro Manila, for example. And it goes back to also yung ating institutional arrangement. So NCR, Metro Manila, is comprised of 16 cities, di ba, and one municipality. We have an MMDA, but the MMDA doesn't have the teeth, di ba, to adequately manage and and consolidate yung directions of the entire area. And based on yung mga studies ng iba't ibang organizations, no, the real size of Metro Manila is not just those 16 cities in one municipality. I believe there was a World Bank study which looked at the true contiguous built-up area of Metro Manila as around mga 80-something cities, no? Covering Kamanaba, covering, diba, yung northern spillover areas, no? And so we don't have the institutional framework available to manage that kind of sprawl, no? And that's already Metro Manila, where up to 40% of our economic product is generated. What more pa sa Metro Cebu? What more pa sa Metro Davao? No? These are things we haven't really thought about.
Oh my God, this is getting quite depressing of an interview, no? So, a grim picture, no? So, pero...
No. It's not meant to be grim, no? It can be happy, pero it entails a certain shift, no, in thinking, no, from yung mas linear and sectoral thinking to more spatial thinking, diba? And it also requires a certain level of multi-scalar thinking, no, na thinking of in terms of a region, in terms of city, down to the level of a barangay, to a sitio, to a block, to a street, di ba? Yun yung connection ng lahat eh. And it, again, it requires a certain level of creativity that currently is not present in our existence.
I really like that, the way you framed it, that it takes a level of creativity and maybe even talagang true political will, di ba? So now that we have a new administration on the horizon, diba? No? So, if you would be given the chance, let's have a hypothetical scenario here. No? So, if you would be able to offer your academic and professional opinion on these things, how would you say should the government, start tackling the challenges that you mentioned a while ago? Of course, you mentioned already yung shift in perspective, no? So pero paano natin haharapin to from your perspective?
Yung usong catchphrase sa Pilipinas is yung bibingka approach, di ba? You have to be able to work from the top down but also apply heat from below. So in terms of yung reform ng urban governance ng Pilipinas, no, part of it has to be national, but a lot of it is very local. And yung at the end of the day kasi LGUs yung frontliners sa urban governance, no, whether it's yung mayors, governors, or mga kapitan. So from the national muna, no, babalik tayo sa basic plan ng Pilipinas, di ba, yung Philippine Development Plan, which sakto dahil bago presidente, kailangan gumawa ng bago. Although in the last administration, NEDA launched yung mas long-term plan, yung ambisyon natin 2040, no? And by law, yung ating mga national plans need to have a spatial component. No, there has to be yung Philippine, di ba, national spatial framework, no? And then yung sa ambition, similarly, there also has to be a long-term urban development framework. Yun. Technically, meron under the law, merong tinatawag dapat na NUDHF, National Urban Development Housing Framework, pero usually papel lang yan, hindi siya sinasabuhay, no? So ultimately, kailangan i-review yon at kailangan siyang gawing mas niinipin, no? And then from there, pag nabuo yun dun sa long-term plan at sa PDP at sa NUDHF, dapat yun ay nakakabit sa iba't ibang aspects ng polisiya, financing, implementation, from housing to land use, no, to transport to DRR down the line, no. Medyo marami din tayong batas na meron na. So part of it is implementing our laws, no. For example, we've had yung UDHA, diba, yung urban housing and development na act for the longest time, no. And since we are talking about urban planning, bahagi dun sa UDHA, kailangan may mga 20% of any LGU has to be reserved for common and green spaces, which is important now, di ba? Kasi with the lockdowns, we realized kailangan palang urban spaces for mental health, for physical health, no, and even now with COVID, we realized na better ventilation is required. Pero minsan yung ginagawa ng mga LGUs, binibilang nila yung kalsado sa 20%. Di ba? Kaya mapansin mo sa NCR, halos wala ng green space natitira. So, yun, no, first of all, we have to be able to implement our laws, no? And the last administration, part of their tasks, no, they were able to create yung bagong DSUD, di ba? Yung new Department of Housing, and being able to ensure na yung that kind of work cascades from the top down, no, will be important. But that said, although marami tayong batas na meron na, marami ding batas na hindi pa rin na-implement or napapasas. For example, a lot of your urban planners, yung holy grail natin ngayon is yung National Land Use Act, which has been languishing in Congress for, I guess, more than 20 years, if I'm not mistaken, no? And that kasi would be able to identify and provide protections kasi for in terms of land use. And the thing is though, and I don't want to name names here, but then very clear at the very top levels, merong conflicts of interest, diba? Which blocks the passage of that bill in its various forms. And there are a lot of other alternative and quote green bills na pending dyan, diba? Merong pending na yung Indigenous Communities and Conserved Territories and Areas Act, diba? There's a Sustainable Forest Management Act. So a lot of them are tied not only urban development but also yung rural development. And so yun nga, medyo marami tayong kailangan gawin. So that's from the legal perspective, no? But admin-wise, ang dami nating mandated actions, no, by law, pero hindi pa rin nagawa ng maayos. But at the end of the day, no, it has to be done at the ground level. So I did mention earlier na a lot of it has to be led by LGUs, no, being able to see yung land use plan, yung CLUPs ng LGU beyond something to cut and paste na for compliance lamang, but as a living document which reflects yung lived realities ng mga tao, no. Kasi right now, even within NCR, no, na medyo mayaman na, ilan lang yung mga LGUs na merong updated CLUP, no? And that's, and iba pa yung land use plan, iba pa yung kanilang shelter plans, iba pa yung transport plans, no? Yun, being able to think it through, diba? Finance it properly and then implement, no, in a way that is humane. So yun, definitely yun yung mga aspects na yun. And then in terms of yung mga infrastructure, no, since we mentioned BTB earlier, kailangan i-review yung broader investment program natin sa Pilipinas, diba? Where we are going to be implementing projects which are not only syempre yung mga flagship na big ticket, but also would contribute to yun, to yung the growth ng mga tao, inclusion, yung linking locations, pero din thinking about yung ating issue ngayon on the climate, no? So beyond concrete, no, what kinds of investments can we make in terms of energy, in terms of food security, diba? In terms of DRR that can help us survive the climate crisis. Kasi you've seen the models, no? In the next few decades, will be NCR and other coastal areas in the Philippines will be submerged. So it's not going to be the next lifetime, it will be within our lifetime. So yun, as early as now, kailangan na siyang mapag-isipan at tugunan ng pansin. So a lot of yung mga development workers were saying nga na parang dapat yung climate change should have been an election issue, no? In the last May elections, but it wasn't, no? So hopefully this next new president, whoever he is or she is, will be able to address that, no, in the next 6 years.
All right. I really like that term that you used, no, yung beyond the concrete, no? So I think it encapsulates that needed change in perspective and the needed planning and governance to really have that, to have that realize yung beyond concrete kind of thinking in terms of urban governance. So siguro
Ayun.
as a
And then,
last,
hahabol din ako. Pwede bang mahabol din ako?
Sure.
Ang dami niya, di ba? So, pero tangible din for NCR, transport. Kailangan ma-address yung mass transport issues sa ngayon. And yung given that yung COVID will be here to stay for a while, we have to think about yung retrofitting ng mga workspaces and schools, no? In terms of yung ventilation and access. A lot of kids, not only in, diba, yung dibdib na areas, but also NCR, do not have access to internet na stable. And ito, actually yung whole work from home issue is going to be a major bottleneck for urban governance moving forward. So I'm not sure if you've been following this, no, pero recently, di ba, nag-suspend na ang work from home for the most part, no? And interesting to, within the BPO sector, which drives a lot of yung mga urban consumption sa NCR, only one major BPO refused to go back to the office, no, citing that yung work from home worked naman for them and actually improving way of life for many of their officials. And as a result, I think they might be losing yung some of their tax benefits, no. So interesting siya kasi yung nakabalik for dun sa office, back to office na order is yung mga private developers. Kasi for example, yung ating mga malls, yung ating mga businesses, they need foot traffic in order to sustain yung previous levels of growth. And so ang tanong, how is that is that a good enough reason to shift back to the way it was, especially now na in NCR right now, as we record in late April, no, halos grabe yung pasakit sa mga commuters araw-araw. So it means changing urban policy at the level of the building, at the level of the workplace, diba? At the level of the household. And yun, parang ang tanong, sino mananaig? Yung mga malaking interest or yung mga pangailangan ng mga tao? Yun lang naman.
Yeah, actually, that was my last question. How do you see the COVID-19 pandemic changing the conversation on urban governance? So you answered it already. So maybe my last question is that medyo medyo pa-motherhood statement siguro. What are your hopes in terms of the Philippines, the urban governance in the Philippines?
Ayun, I really hope that things will change within our lifetimes, no? Kasi in terms of yun nga, the planning, the financing, design, di ba, implementation, all of these things, no? Kasi they say that yung mga cities natin are built environment is a reflection of our politics and the way we treat ourselves and each other. So pangit, pag hindi makatao, hindi makatarungan ng syudad mo, what does it say about who we are as a people? Diba?
Yeah.
So, yun. And so, it will take a lot of work, a lot of soul searching, and effort as well for people to change these relationships, these social dynamics, and then translate them into the built environment. No? And I'm still hopeful that we'll see it in our lifetime. Say it's not just something na motherhood, no, it's a question of survival. It really is.
All right. Thank you so much, Ika, for your insights in this interview. Would you like to promote anything, like a project coming up, or where our listeners can follow you in social media for tweets on urban planning and urban governance?
I'm way well. unless Elon Musk does something really nasty in the next few weeks. So I'm still going to be on Twitter. I'm at Ika Fernandez on Twitter. And yung dun sa, medyo nag-hiatus nga lang yung urbanismo, but we're on social media on urbanismo.ph, on Twitter and on Instagram. So ayan, hopefully by this time in the future, in May, things are better and looking up. And hopefully this next administration will take urban governance, transport, housing, land use as a serious cornerstone of her or his administration. Ayun po.
We would like to thank Ika for generously lending us her expertise and guesting in this episode of Hindi na Bago Yan. Watch out for a new episode every Saturday. For updates on the show, like, subscribe, or follow our social media pages. That's it for now. Have a good day.